The present resurgence of Islam is a clear indication from Allah that the polarization of the people of Iman and the people of Kufr on a world scale is underway. This polarization is a necessary preliminary phase before their respective leaders, the Mahdi for the Mu'minun and Dajjal, the individual for the Kafirun, can appear, and before the two opposites meet, as they inevitably must, since anyone who is kafir cannot help but attack anyone who is Muslim, and once the Muslims are attacked, Allah has ordered them to fight back in self-defense, and to kill their aggressors, that is, anyone who attacks them, and then refuses either to say the Shahada, that is, to witness that there is no God, only Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, or to surrender by accepting Muslim governance and paying the jizya tax. One way of measuring the level of ignorance in a kafir society, and the corresponding fear of existence and anxiety about provision and shelter which arise out of that ignorance, which is the hallmark of the kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system, is to examine the extent to which people insure themselves and their goods against possible disaster and misfortune, even when they are not required to do so by kafir law. The kafir insurance system is totally unnecessary for the people who know how existence works and who follow the prophetic life pattern, which is Ur's own insurance. Since everyone mirrors the consequences of their actions, both in this life and the next, it follows that the one who is unaware of what action is fruitful and what action is unfruitful often brings misfortune upon him or herself, solely because of the way in which he or she behaves. Since the kafir does not know this, he or she seeks to avoid the effects of such misfortune by insuring against it before it happens, rather than by abandoning the course of action, which is the real cause of the misfortune. The way of Muhammad is the science of fruitful action. Lane, the Quran, fruitful action is called halal, whilst unfruitful action is called haram. Although these words are sometimes translated, respectively, as meaning what is permitted and what is forbidden, their real meaning is to be found in the consequences of the actions which they describe. If this perspective is lost, it often happens that the conceptual framework, which the kafir calls morality, begins to develop. This moral attitude, which is regarded as the mark of being civilized by whoever has it, in fact tends to make people forget where they are going. It works like this. To begin with, there is the knowledge that what is halal is fruitful in this world, and leads to the garden in the next world, whilst what is haram is unfruitful in his world, and leads to the fire in the next world. This applies even to the food which you eat, because if you eat halal food, your actions will tend to be halal, and if you eat haram food, your actions will tend to be haram. Drinking wine or eating pork, for example, may not in themselves appear to be serious wrong actions, but the actions which may arise out of these actions, such as violence or adultery, for example, often are. They lead not only to an imbalance in the body, but also to an imbalance in actions, an imbalance which causes distress in this world, and is experienced as the fire in the next world. Lane, the same way, doing what is halal leads to balanced action, which results in harmony in this world, and is experienced as the garden in the next world. This perspective begins to be lost when it is said that halal means permitted, and haram means forbidden. The original perspective is further clouded when a value judgment is placed on what is permitted and what is forbidden, that is, when what is described as halal is called good, and when what is described as haram is called bad, again, because it becomes easier to forget why it is good or why it is bad. If the overall perspective of the next world is lost, then people forget why something is really good or really bad. Instead, they begin to form fixed ideas of what is good and what is bad. Then, if they forget that Allah looks at the intention behind the action and not the action itself, they begin to be less critical of their own actions. They no longer fear the fire or hope for the garden, and instead become more critical of other people's actions. They begin to judge the outward actions of others, though unaware of what the inward intention behind those actions might be in accordance with their own ideas of what is good and what is bad. Once people forget about the fire and the garden, and indeed cease to know that the next world exists, they then begin to call what appears to be expedient good, and what appears not to be expedient bad. In effect, their idea of what is good and what is bad is no longer connected to the realities of life, but rather is attached to whatever they give reality. Once this stage has been reached, you have what the kafir calls morality, that is, a complex web of do's and don'ts which are given spurious validity by emotional value judgments, which often have no relation to the true nature of existence, which, like kafir law, are always subject to change and re-evaluation, and which accordingly tend to cause whoever has this moral attitude to forget where he or she is going, that is, to Allah, via the fire or via the garden. Anyone who becomes aware of the hypocrisy which inevitably arises out of kafir morality usually then rejects it. Once they have rejected it, the why have no frame of reference to use when dealing with situations which require judgment, other than their own personal preferences and prejudices, together with whatever they have already learned from their own experience, that is, they have a limited knowledge of what is halal and what is haram, which they have arrived at by trial and error, and the full significance of which they do not realize, because they do not link this limited knowledge of what is halal and what is haram to what will be happening in the next world. They then have a choice, which is either to do what they want, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, or else to set out on a journey to discover the full science of what is halal and what is haram by following the way of Muhammad, may the blessings and peace of Allah be on him. If they make the first choice, they are at the mercy of their own desires and the illusory goals which the kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system, promises them. If they make the second choice, then they will arrive at the knowledge of what is halal and what is haram, and they will know why something is halal or haram. If they follow the way of Muhammad, avoiding what is haram and doing what is halal, then they will arrive at an inwardly peaceful and outwardly balanced state of being, in which the very idea of kafir insurance will be patendi ridiculous. The one who does not follow the way of Muhammad, on the other hand, and who subscribes to the producer-consumer process, will inevitably think that insurance is a good idea, and waste as much money as he or she can afford on it. People are encouraged to insure against every possible misfortune by the kafir insurance companies simply because the more people insure, the greater the profit will be for the company. A kafir insurance company cannot be described as a benevolent institution. It exists to make money out of other people's fears and anxieties. Of course, it appears to be worthwhile when one of the events which have been insured against actually takes place, and the person who took out the insurance eventually collects the money. But as we have already noted, there are more human ways of dealing with loss and misfortune, which in the real Muslim community take the form of voluntary giving out, without your having had to pay a premium as a condition precedent, either by individuals in the community who have been given more than they need by Allah, or else from the Bayt al-Mal, that is the community's central fund, into which all the minimal taxes required by the Quran and the Sunnah are paid, for the purpose of redistribution amongst those in need. A brief historical study of Muslim communities in the past clearly shows that whenever their people held to what is in the Quran and the Sunnah, and only paid the taxes which Allah had told them to pay, and immediately redistributed those taxes once they had been collected in accordance with what is in the Quran and the Sunnah, then those communities prospered. As soon as the people began to abandon what is in the Quran and the Sunnah, they were given leaders over them, who likewise read the Quran and Sunnah. The Prophet Muhammad, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, said that every people have the leaders that they deserve. As soon as these leaders began to gather extra taxes, and to keep the proceeds either for themselves or out of anxiety, instead of redistributing them in accordance with what is in the Quran and the Sunnah, then the communities became divided against each other, ceased to prosper, and were eventually destroyed, just as Allah has promised in the Quran, that every people who reject prophetic guidance will be destroyed. When the companion of the Prophet who was called Omar became caliph, may Allah be pleased with him, he requested that he be told immediately, the moment he strayed outside, what is in the Quran and the Sunnah. So fearful was he of Allah and the last day. He was only too aware that the life transaction of Islam is its own insurance. A person once came to him and asked him to do the rain prayer, since there was a bad drought at the time. Sayyidina Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, replied that the reason for the drought was the fact that too many of the people in the community had become lax in following what is in the Quran and the Sunnah. Lane effect, the outward drought, was a reflection of the inward drought of lack of trust in Allah. When that trust was renewed, then the rain, which is the mercy of Allah, came. The Prophet Muhammad, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, said that if anyone were to have been a prophet after him, then it would have been Sayyidina Umar, may Allah be pleased with him. The fact that many of the so-called Muslim, but actually Kafir governments, which are, the time of writing this, still in control of the Muslim lands, because they are being supported by the colonizers, who helped to install them there in the first place, collect taxes, in addition to what is prescribed by Allah in the Quran and the Sunnah, and then refuse to redistribute them, is not only one of the reasons for the lack of prosperity in these countries, but is also a clear sign of the extent of the influence of the worldwide kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system. Indeed, it is a well-known fact that the oil revenue of the Muslim countries is being used by the people who control it, not so much for the benefit of the Muslims, but rather to support the kafir producer-consumer system of both the West and the East, of both the high-tech North and the poor South. This revenue, or at least a large proportion of it, is either invested in large kafir corporations, or else it is deposited in kafir financial institutions, where it collects compound interest, and is used to provide compound interest-bearing loans to the poorer Muslim countries, thereby increasing their national debt still further. Since these corporations and financial institutions are controlled by the Freemasonic elite of the kafir system, that is the Dajjal system, it follows that they are using the wealth of the Muslims to destroy the Muslims. For one of the principal aims of the Freemasons is to destroy the Muslims, in order to fully achieve worldwide control through their business and finance systems. That is, by establishing the kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system, worldwide, the New World Order. The Prophet Muhammad, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, said that every people has its trial, and that the trial of the Muslims would be wealth. He also said that the downfall of the Arabs would be black gold, a term which in the modern world has only relatively recently been coined to describe oil. This much is clear from what has already happened, not only to the rulers of Saudi Arabia, who in the name of Islam are busy establishing a police state, based largely on the kafir models of the West, but also to all the Arab states in the Middle East, which as a result of the recent Gulf War, instigated principally in order to secure the oil fields for the benefit of the high-tech North, have all been considerably destabilized and virtually bankrupted. The Prophet Muhammad, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, made it clear that the leader of a Muslim community should not be chosen as leader simply because his father was leader before him. It is not the Sunnah to have royal families. If this was the Sunnah, then clearly the royal family of the Muslims would have been the family of the Prophet Muhammad. May the blessings and peace of Allah be on him and them, and accordingly virtually all of the Muslim rulers for the last 1400 years would have been descended from the Prophet Muhammad. May the blessings and peace of Allah be on him, and on his family, and on his companions, and on all who follow him, and them with sincerity in what they are able, until the last day. A brief historical study of Muslim communities in the past shows that as soon as these communities opted for dynastic rule, they inevitably became corrupted and were destroyed. It is absolutely clear that the leader of a Muslim community should be recognized as such on the basis that his fear and knowledge of Allah are great, and that of all the people in the community, he has the best understanding of what is in the Quran and the Sunnah, simply because he most embodies what is in the Quran and the Sunnah. The corruption in the Muslim lands today is not surprising. It is part of the inevitable process of life. Furthermore, to simply blame the kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system, for that corruption, is not to see the whole picture. Clearly, if some of the Muslim leaders in the past had not already been prone to corruption, then the kafir colonizers would have been unable to plant the seeds of the kafir system. That is the Dajjal system, in the Muslim countries in the first place. Not would those seeds have been able to sprout and grow. The truth of the matter is everything in life is subject to birth and death and growth and decay. Even the first Muslim community of Medina, al-Munawwara, was subject to this cycle. The Prophet Muhammad, may the blessings and peace of Allah be on him, foretold that the dynamic living Islam which that community enjoyed would only last in Medina for 30 or 70 years after he had died. He foretold civil war amongst the Muslims, that is, that Muslim would fight Muslim. He foretold that what had begun as a prophecy and a mercy would become a caliphate and a mercy, would become a tyranny filled with many injustices. He also said that towards the end of Dimi, a just and merciful caliphate would once again be established by the Muslims. And he never mentioned anything about a new world order being established by the Kafirun for any length of time. It is very easy to make Islam an instrument of tyranny, simply by systematizing it and moralizing it, and then inflicting that system and that morality, neither of which have anything to do with the life whence action brought by the Prophet Muhammad on other people who have no desire to be regulated by such a system and such a morality. Many of those who are alive today have seen and experienced this happening. The Prophet Muhammad also foretold that not all of his community would go astray. He said that towards the end of the world, the Muslims would be divided into 73 different groups, and only one of those groups would have the living life transaction of Islam, which he had originally brought. There can be no doubt that this one group, which has access to the living life transaction of Islam in all its rich simplicity, is comprised of the awliya of Allah, that is, the friends of Allah, the people whom Allah loves and who love Allah along with all those who recognize and follow them. The awliya of Allah are the ones who have preserved the living life transaction of Islam by the grace and guidance of Allah in every time and age.